There's a specific kind of phone call that changes everything. Not the ones you plan, not the ones you rehearse in the mirror at 3 in the morning, but the ones your hands make before your brain can talk them out of it. Amara had spent 6 years building a life that did not include Kongjun. One phone call was about to burn every single brick of it down. The hospital smelled the way all hospitals smell, like antiseptic, quiet devastation, and the particular brand of hopelessness that comes in a white coat and speaks in measured tones, specifically designed to make you feel like crying would be an overreaction. Amara was not overreacting. She was, in fact, operating at a level of internal chaos that no external expression could adequately represent. Her son, her Kofi, 6 years old, loud as a marketplace and twice as alive, was lying in a bed that looked criminally too large for him, connected to machines that beeped with the casual indifference of appliances that did not understand what they were measuring. Every beep was his heart. Every pause between beeps was her own heart stopping in solidarity. The doctor had come in 40 minutes ago. She remembered his face, kind, tired, professionally sorrowful in the way that suggested he had delivered this particular speech before and had never once found a better way to say it. He told her that Kofi's condition had deteriorated faster than they anticipated. He told her the specialist they needed was not available until morning. He told her that morning, in this context, was a word they were using loosely, optimistically, perhaps incorrectly. He told her to prepare herself. Amara had looked at him with the specific expression of a woman who had survived Nigerian traffic, Korean immigration bureaucracy, and 6 years of single motherhood in a country where she was permanently, visibly, exhaustingly foreign, and she said very quietly, "Prepare myself for what exactly?" The doctor had no answer for that. Doctors rarely do when the question is that honest. After he left, Amara sat beside Kofi's bed and held his small hand and listened to him breathe. His breathing was the kind that made you pay attention to every inhale, the kind that made silence feel dangerous. He had his father's jawline. She had noticed this approximately 4,000 times and refused to say it aloud even once. And her own stubborn mouth, slightly open now in uneasy sleep, as if even unconscious he was preparing an argument. She loved him so violently, it was almost inconvenient. Outside, Seoul was doing what Seoul always did during a crisis, absolutely nothing personal about it, simply continuing to exist at full, neon-lit, rain-soaked volume. 3 days of rain had turned the streets into dark mirrors, reflecting ambulance lights and convenience store signs in equal, uncaring measure. The city had no interest in Kofi's breathing. The city had no interest in Amara's terror. Seoul was, as it had always been, comprehensively indifferent to individual human suffering while being inexplicably beautiful about it. Amara stood up slowly, walked to the window, and looked out at the lights. She had a rule about Kongjun. The rule was simple, clean, and absolute. He did not exist in her current life. He existed in a previous chapter, a chapter she had closed, filed, and mentally placed on a very high shelf behind a locked door in a room she did not visit. She had been rigorous about this rule. She had been, frankly, impressive about this rule. 6 years of impressive. Then her son made that sound. It was small, barely audible, a faint catch in his breath, a hesitation, as if his body was asking itself a question it was not sure it wanted to answer. Amara turned from the window. She looked at him. The machines beeped. The rain continued, and 6 years of impressive dissolved in approximately 4 seconds. Her phone was in her hand before she made a decision. Her hands, apparently, had already voted. The receipt, absurd, soggy from the humidity, she always somehow ended up carrying in her coat pocket through seasons, years, and common sense, was between her fingers before she remembered reaching for it. The number was familiar the way only numbers you have never dialed but always remembered can be familiar. Like a word in a language you grew up hearing but were never taught. She stared at it. She thought about everything that number meant. The world attached to it. The violence, the power, the cold architecture of a man who had built an empire on silence and the fear of consequence. She thought about the night she left. She thought about the choice she made to protect her son from exactly this, from this number, from this world, from the very call she was now considering making. Then Kofi breathed that way again, and the choice, as it turned out, had already made itself. She dialed. It rang once, just once, and then his voice, low, measured, carrying the specific weight of a man who had not spoken her name in 6 years, but had never once stopped knowing how, came through the phone like a verdict. Amara. Not a question, not surprise, just her name, in his voice, landing in her chest like something that had been in transit for 6 years and had finally arrived at the correct address. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. Kofi, she said. He's dying, June. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. In another man, 3 seconds would mean hesitation, calculation, negotiation. In Kong Jun, 3 seconds meant something had already been decided, orders were already forming, and the rest of the world simply had not caught up yet. Which hospital? She told him. Don't move, he said. The line went dead. Amara lowered the phone. She looked at her son. She looked at the door. She looked at the city outside the window, still raining, still indifferent, still beautiful in its cruelty. She had just called the most dangerous man in Seoul. For a child that man did not know was his. And somewhere across this rain-soaked city, an empire was already moving. Before you read what happens next, think carefully. Because there's a version of this story where Amara never makes that call. Where she sits in that hospital room and accepts what the doctor said. Where she chooses safety over her son's life, because safety was the reason she left in the first place. If you believe no mother should ever have to make that choice, that no system should ever push a woman to the edge of the underworld just to save her child, drop a comment below. And if you're not the kind of person who stands with mothers like Amara, well, you already know which side of this story you are on. Hit like if Kofi deserves to live. Subscribe if you believe love is always worth the risk. Because only someone who has never loved anything would stay silent right now. Kong Jun had not moved in 60 seconds. This was unusual. The men in the room, 7 of them, each selected for their particular combination of loyalty, competence, and complete absence of personality, had collectively served him for a combined total of 43 years. In that time, they had seen him negotiate, threaten, dismantle, and occasionally reconstruct entire power structures with the emotional range of a man ordering breakfast. They had seen him receive news of betrayals, ambushes, and one particularly unfortunate incident involving a rival gang and a misdelivered shipment of dried squid that nearly started a territorial war in Mapo district. They had never seen him go still like this. Not frozen, not shocked. Still, the way a predator goes still, not from fear, but from the specific, terrifying focus of something that has just identified exactly what it's going to do next, and is simply waiting for its body to catch up with its decision. His second-in-command, Ryu Suk, a man built like a wardrobe and twice as expressionless, watched his boss set the phone down on the glass table with the careful precision of someone handling something that might shatter. Then Kong Jun stood, straightened his jacket, and said 4 words in a tone that made the temperature in the room drop by a measurable degree. Get the car. Now, Ryu Suk did not ask which car. He did not ask where they were going. He did not ask any of the 14 reasonable questions the reasonable man might ask in this situation, because Ryu Suk had not survived 17 years in this organization by being reasonable. He had survived by being fast. He was already on his phone before Kong Jun finished the sentence. The building emptied with the coordinated efficiency of a military operation, which was appropriate because Kong Jun ran his organization with military logic, hierarchy, discipline, and the foundational understanding that chaos was simply order that had not been corrected yet. Within 4 minutes, 3 cars were running in the underground garage. Within 6, Kong Jun's personal physician, a small nervous man named Dr. Lim who had the unfortunate career trajectory of becoming the private doctor to the most dangerous man in Seoul and now could never, realistically, retire, had been called, briefed, and was already gathering equipment with the frantic energy of a man who understood that immediately, in this context, meant 5 minutes ago. Within 8 minutes, the convoy was moving through the rain-soaked streets of Seoul like a dark river cutting through neon. Inside the lead car, Kang Jun sat in the back seat and looked out the window and said absolutely nothing. Ryu Suk, riding beside him, had the professional wisdom not to speak either. But he was thinking, which was, for Ryu Suk, an unusually strenuous activity about the name. Amara. He had heard it exactly once before, years ago, in passing, in the context of a conversation Kang Jun shut down so quickly and finally that no one in the organization ever brought it up again. It had become one of those names that existed in the negative space of their world, present precisely because it was never mentioned. A woman, a foreign woman, who had apparently once been significant enough to earn permanent silence. Ryu Suk was not a man given to curiosity, but even he, in the deep, rarely used corridors of his practical mind, was asking questions he would never say aloud. Back in the hospital, Amara was experiencing the specific psychological phenomenon of a person who has just done something irreversible and is now living in the 10 seconds after. She was sitting beside Kofi's bed. She was holding his hand. She was also, in the private cinema of her own mind, watching a highlight reel of every reason this was a catastrophically terrible idea. Because here was the thing about calling Kang Jun. It was not simply calling a powerful man. It was not simply asking for a favor. It was reopening a door she had sealed with 6 years of discipline, reinvention, and deliberate forgetting. And not just reopening it, but standing in the doorway in a hospital gown holding her son, while all the things she had locked on the other side came flooding back through. The memories arrived without permission, the way memories always do when you are exhausted enough to stop fighting them. She remembered the night she saved him, the blood, his impossible composure, the way he had looked at her afterward, not with gratitude exactly, because gratitude was too small a word for whatever that expression was. Like recognition, like he had been looking for something his entire life without knowing what it was, and had just found it bleeding onto a hospital floor in the middle of the night. She remembered the weeks that followed, his curiosity about her, the way he asked questions like someone taking careful notes. She remembered laughing at him, actually laughing, unguarded and genuine, because he had tried to cook her jollof rice using a recipe he had clearly found on a website written by someone who had never seen jollof rice and possibly had never seen rice. It had been terrible. She had eaten it anyway. He had watched her with an expression so carefully neutral, it was essentially screaming. She remembered the moment she realized she was in love with him, and the moment, arriving almost simultaneously because life has a vicious sense of comedic timing, she realized that loving him was the most dangerous thing she had ever done. More dangerous than staying in Seoul on an expired visa. More dangerous than the night she helped a bleeding gangster off her floor. More dangerous than anything because it was the only danger that could reach the parts of her that armor could not protect. And then she had found out she was pregnant, and the danger had a name, and the name was Kofi, and she had packed a single bag at 3 in the morning and walked out of that world like she was simply going to the shop and happened to never come back. She looked at her son now, his small face, his ridiculous perfect eyelashes. He got those from her side. She maintained firmly, despite all visual evidence suggesting the situation was more complicated than that. A nurse appeared in the doorway and said something in Korean about the doctor doing another assessment. Amara nodded. Her Korean, after 6 years, was efficient and slightly aggressive, a combination her language teacher had once described as functional but alarming, which Amara considered a compliment. After the nurse left, the room went quiet again except for the machines. Amara looked at the door. 40 minutes, maybe less. That was how long it would take a man like Kang Jun to cross Seoul on a rainy night when the entire city understood instinctively to get out of his way. 40 minutes before everything she had carefully separated came crashing into the same room. She looked at Kofi. He was still breathing, fragile, fighting, stubborn, even in unconsciousness, which was honestly the most thing possible. Hold on, she thought, with the ferocity of a woman who had held on through everything else. Just hold on a little longer. Outside, through the rain-streaked window, headlights appeared at the end of the street. Multiple headlights, moving with purpose, cutting through the downpour like the city itself was parting to let them through. They were coming faster than she expected. Of course they were. Somewhere in Seoul, an entire underworld just mobilized for one child. One call, one name. If you believe that kind of love deserves to be witnessed, subscribe now. Because only cold people scroll past this story without staying. 3. Kang Joon walked into the hospital like he owned it. This was not arrogance. This was simply what happened when a man who had spent 20 years ensuring that every room he entered immediately reorganized itself around his presence walked into a room. The hospital lobby, which had been operating at its standard 2 in the morning energy, one bored receptionist, one security guard losing a battle with sleep, and the distant echo of a vending machine being assaulted by someone who had lost their money, suddenly became a completely different place. The security guard woke up, fully, immediately, with the particular alertness of a man whose body had decided that whatever training he had received was now relevant. The receptionist stood without knowing why she was standing. Even the vending machine seemed to stop rattling. Ryu Suk entered first, which was always how it worked, followed by 2 men whose primary professional qualification was that they made Ryu Suk look approachable. Then Kang Joon, then Dr. Lim, scurrying slightly, carrying a bag that clinked with the quiet authority of expensive medical equipment. Looking like a man who had made several poor life choices and was actively reconsidering all of them. Kang Joon stopped at the reception desk. The receptionist, young, tired, name tag reading Ji-yeon, looked up at him and experienced the specific crisis of a person who simultaneously recognizes danger and cannot immediately locate the correct professional response to it. "Park Amara," Kang Joon said. Not a question, barely even a sentence. Just 2 words placed on the desk like a business card. Ji-yeon checked her computer with hands that were admirably steady given the circumstances. She told him the room number. She then watched, with the expression of someone mentally composing a story they would tell for the rest of their lives, as the most terrifying collection of men she had ever seen in a professional context walked calmly toward the elevator. Behind them, Ryu Suk paused, turned, and said, with genuine pleasantness, "Thank you. Have a good evening." Ji-yeon did not have words. She nodded. She would think about that interaction for years. Amara heard them before she saw them. Not loudly. That was the thing about Kang Joon's world. It did not announce itself with noise. It announced itself with a quality of silence that moved differently from regular silence. A weight, a shift in air pressure, the sudden awareness that something significant was reorganizing itself just outside your door. She stood up from Kofi's bedside. She straightened her coat, secondhand, slightly damp, completely inadequate armor for this particular moment, and turned to face the door with the expression of a woman who had rehearsed composure for 6 years and was now hoping the rehearsal had been sufficient. The door opened. Kang Joon filled it the way he always filled spaces, not physically, though he was tall enough to make the doorframe seem like a reasonable fit, but with that quality he carried like a second skin, the quality that made rooms decide he was in charge before he said a single word. He looked at her. She looked at him. 6 years collapsed into nothing, or expanded into everything. It was genuinely impossible to tell which. He was different and exactly the same, which was the cruelest possible combination. His hair was shorter. There were new angles in his face, not age exactly, but the specific sharpening that comes from years of decisions that cost something. He was wearing a dark coat that probably cost more than Amara's monthly rent, which she found simultaneously impressive and deeply annoying. His eyes found her face and stayed there for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to be an entire conversation in a language that had no words, and then moved past her to the small figure in the bed. And that was when Amara saw it. The thing she had seen only in rare, unguarded moments 7 years ago. The thing beneath the empire. Kang Joon looked at Kofi, at this small, breathing, fighting child he had never met, whose existence he did not know about, whose face carried echoes of both his parents in a combination that was frankly incriminating, and something in his expression moved. Not much. A fraction. The kind of movement only someone who had studied that face with inappropriate thoroughness could detect. Amara detected it. Her chest tightened. Dr. Lim appeared at Kang Joon's shoulder, already professional, already assessing, his eyes moving over Kofi with the focused efficiency of a man who had been yanked from his apartment at midnight and was going to be absolutely excellent about it, because the alternative was not worth contemplating. "What did the hospital doctors say?" Dr. Lim asked Amara directly. Pen already out, which Amara appreciated because it was the first interaction she had all night where someone led with competence instead of condolence. She told him everything: the deterioration timeline, the medications they had tried, the specialist who was not available until morning. Dr. Lim listened with the focused stillness of someone filing information into immediate action categories. He was already moving toward Kofi before she finished speaking, already opening his bag, already existing in a professional register that made the previous doctors seem like they had been guessing politely. Kong Jun had not moved from the doorway. Amara crossed him. She stopped 2 feet away, close enough to speak quietly, far enough to maintain the structural integrity of her composure, which was currently load-bearing and could not afford additional pressure. "Thank you for coming," she said. It came out more formal than she intended, more like something you said to a plumber. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something more complicated than a smile. "You called," he said simply. "I had no choice. You had choices." A pause. "You chose me." The accuracy of this was deeply inconvenient. Amara said nothing. Kong Jun looked past her at Kofi again, at the small face, the jaw, the stubborn, even in sleep expression. He looked for a long moment with an attention that was no longer casual. "How old?" he asked. The question landed quietly, gently almost, which was, from this man, perhaps the most alarming version of it. Amara felt the ground shift slightly beneath her feet. She had prepared for many things tonight. She had prepared for the terror of his arrival, for the collision of her 2 worlds, for the guilt and the gratitude and the grief, all arriving at once like poorly scheduled buses. She had not prepared for this question. Not tonight. Not yet. "6, she said. Another silence. Kong Jun was very good at silences. He used them the way other people used words, precisely, deliberately, to communicate things that language was too imprecise to carry. This silence said, "I am doing mathematics." This silence said, "The mathematics is not complicated." This silence said, "We will discuss this. Not now, but we will discuss this." He looked at her. She looked back at him. The machines beeped. The rain continued outside. Dr. Lim worked efficiently and quietly behind them. "Let him work," Kong Jun said finally, nodding toward Dr. Lim. "He is the best in the country." Amara exhaled, just slightly. "And if that is not enough, then I will find someone better than the best." He said it without drama, without performance. The way you state a fact about gravity. Amara looked at this man she had spent 6 years not thinking about, standing in a hospital doorway at 2 in the morning because she made one phone call and felt the deeply unwelcome, thoroughly inconvenient sensation of feeling, for the first time all night, like Kofi might actually survive this. She hated how much she needed that feeling. She hated even more where it was coming from. A man who runs the most feared empire in Seoul just dropped everything, crossed a city in the rain, and walked into a hospital at 2 in the morning for a child he did not even know existed yet. If that does not tell you everything about what this story is really about, nothing will. The doctors gave up. The system gave up. But he did not. Subscribe now if you believe the people who show up in the dark deserve to be witnessed. Dr. Lim worked with the quiet intensity of a man who understood that speed and precision were not opposites but partners, and that in this particular room, on this particular night, the margin between the two was exactly the width of a 6-year-old boy's survival. He had seen bad cases. In 17 years of private medicine, first legitimate, then considerably less so, he had seen things that would make a standard medical textbook close itself in despair. He had treated men with injuries that had no business being survivable. He had worked in conditions that would make a hospital ethics board spontaneously combust. He was not easily alarmed. He was currently quite focused. Kofi's vitals were worse than the hospital doctors had communicated, which Dr. Lim noted with the internal commentary of a man who had strong feelings about the quality of public medical assessments, but absolutely no time to express them. The boy's blood pressure was dropping with the quiet determination of something that had made up its mind. His temperature was doing something complicated and unhelpful. And there was a specific reading on the monitor that Dr. Lim looked at for exactly 3 seconds before reaching into his bag with an urgency that he kept carefully invisible on his face. Behind him, Kong Jun watched, not hovering, not interfering, standing at a precise distance that communicated both presence and restraint, the way a man watches something important when he has learned, through considerable personal cost, that watching is sometimes the only useful thing he can do. Amara stood on the opposite side of Kofi's bed. Her hand was on her son's arm. Her face was doing the thing faces do when the person wearing them has decided that falling apart is not currently scheduled and has rescheduled it for a later, more convenient time that will probably never actually arrive. Dr. Lim straightened, turned, looked at Kong Jun with the expression of a man delivering a report rather than an emotion. He needs a specific medication. It is not in this hospital's pharmacy. Name it, Kong Jun said. Dr. Lim named it. Kong Jun looked at Ryu Suk. Ryu Suk was already on his phone. This was the thing about Kong Jun's world that civilians never fully understood, the part that did not make it into the whispered stories or the fear-soaked reputation. It was not simply that he was dangerous. Plenty of people were dangerous. It was that he had built, over 20 years of ruthless, meticulous effort, a network so comprehensive that it touched every layer of Seoul simultaneously. The legal and the illegal, the visible and the invisible, the hospital pharmacies that were closed at 2 in the morning and the people who had keys to them. Within 11 minutes, a car was dispatched. Within 20, the medication was in Dr. Lim's hands. Amara watched this happen with the expression of someone recalibrating their understanding of what was possible. She had known, in abstract terms, what Kong Jun was capable of. She had understood it intellectually, the way you understand that a river is powerful without standing in the current. Standing in the current was a different education entirely. You have people everywhere, she said. Not accusatory, just stating a geography. Useful people, he said. In useful places. That is one word for it. What word would you use? She looked at the medication, now being carefully administered to her son. She looked at Kofi's face, still pale, still fighting, still stubbornly present in the way that had characterized him since approximately 30 seconds after he was born and had not let up since. Tonight, she said quietly, I would use the word necessary. Something shifted in Kong Jun's expression. Brief, contained, gone before it could be properly categorized. He looked at Kofi again. It was becoming a habit, this looking, each time slightly longer than the last. Each time with an attention that was accumulating into something neither of them was ready to name. Amara noticed and said nothing because there was nothing to say that did not open a door she was not prepared to walk through in a hospital room at 2:30 in the morning while her son was still in danger. Some conversations required solid ground. This one especially. Dr. Lim adjusted something on the monitor and made a sound that was professionally non-committal but directionally positive. Amara had spent enough time around medical people tonight to have developed a working taxonomy of their noises. This one meant things were not getting worse, which, given where they had been 40 minutes ago, was its own category of miracle. She exhaled. Then the door opened. Not Ryu Suk. Not another of Kong Jun's men. A different energy entirely. A woman, 50s, sharp-eyed, wearing a hospital administrator's lanyard with the expression of someone who had been woken up, informed that an unusual situation had developed in room 412 and had arrived to restore institutional order to whatever was happening in her hospital at this hour. Her name tag read Park Soo-jin, head of night administration. She took in the room. The equipment. Dr. Lim. The men stationed outside the door that she had presumably had to navigate to get in. And then Kong Jun, standing in the corner of a hospital room like a man who had not been invited but had also clearly not required an invitation. Her expression did the specific journey of a person encountering something significantly outside their job description. She looked at Amara, woman to woman. The look said, I have questions. Amara's look back said, I have answers, but none of them will make your evening easier. Park Soo-jin looked at Kong Jun one more time. Then she looked back at Dr. Lim, who was working with the focused calm of someone who intended to save a child's life and found administrative concerns only mildly relevant to that project. She made a decision. "I will need to see his credentials," she said, nodding at Dr. Lim, with the tone of a woman who had chosen the most manageable battle available to her. "Of course," Dr. Lim said, without looking up. "They're in my bag. You're welcome to look." After, Park Soo-jin stood in the doorway for 3 more seconds. Then she nodded once, with the dignity of a woman who had assessed the situation, identified the correct response, and was going to require several days and possibly a strong drink to fully process it. She left. Ryu Suk, from his position in the corridor, watched her go, and then looked back into the room with the expression of a man deeply committed to not having an opinion about anything. Inside, the monitor beeped, then beeped again, and this time, the rhythm was different. Steadier, stronger, the kind of rhythm that sounded to a mother who had been listening to it with her entire body for the past 4 hours, like an argument being won. Amara's hand tightened on Kofi's arm. Dr. Lim looked at the monitor, then at Kong Jun, and gave a single nod that contained, in its economy, more relief than a paragraph could carry. Kong Jun said nothing, but his shoulders, almost imperceptibly, dropped exactly half an inch. Amara saw it. She saw it, and she looked away before he could notice that she had noticed, because some things were too tender to witness openly in front of a man who had spent his entire life making sure no one could see the tender things. Kofi was stabilizing. Her son was stabilizing. And in the corner of the room, the most feared man in Seoul was standing very still and breathing for what felt like the first time all night. The system that was supposed to save Kofi had a specialist who was not available until morning. It had doctors who told a mother to prepare herself. It had pharmacies that closed at 2 in the morning when children still needed medicine. If you're angry about that, good. You should be. Subscribe to this channel if you believe that no mother should have to call a mafia boss to save her child because the system that was supposed to protect them already walked out the door. Hit like, leave a comment, and if you're not subscribing, ask yourself honestly whose side you're actually on. Kofi opened his eyes at 4:17 in the morning. Not dramatically. Not with the cinematic suddenness of a child sitting bolt upright in a hospital bed while orchestral music swells in the background. He opened them the way children wake from deep sleep, slowly, reluctantly, with the specific expression of someone returning from somewhere comfortable and finding the destination considerably less so. He blinked at the ceiling. He blinked at the machines. He blinked at his mother, who was gripping his hand with a pressure that would have been concerning under normal circumstances, but was, given the evening's itinerary, entirely proportionate. Then he blinked at the tall man, standing in the corner of the room. Kofi was 6 years old. He was, as previously established, clever in the particular way that children are clever when they have spent their entire lives as the sole focus of a highly intelligent woman with no one else to talk to. He had opinions. He had observations. He had, on one memorable occasion, told his mother's landlord that his building's plumbing had the structural integrity of a bad promise, a sentence he had clearly absorbed from somewhere and deployed with devastating accuracy. He looked at Kong Jun for a long moment with the unfiltered assessment that only small children and very old people permit themselves. Then he said, in Korean that was accented with his mother's particular brand of Nigerian-inflected soul, "You are very tall." Kong Jun looked at him. A silence passed that contained, on Kong Jun's side, approximately 47 things he did not know how to say, and, on Kofi's side, the simple patience of a child waiting for an adult to catch up. "Yes," Kong Jun said finally. Kofi considered this answer, found it acceptable, turned to his mother. "Mama, I am hungry." Amara made a sound that was equal parts laugh and sob and relief, and 6 years of love arriving all at once through a very small opening. She pressed her forehead to his hand and stayed there for a moment that belonged only to the two of them, and the machines beeped steadily, and the rain outside had finally, quietly begun to stop. Dr. Lim declared Kofi stable at 4:45, with the satisfied efficiency of a man who had done excellent work under unreasonable conditions and was now quietly looking forward to going home and sleeping for 11 hours. He gave Amara a list of instructions with the thoroughness of someone who understood that the woman receiving them would follow them with military precision, which was an accurate assessment. He shook Kong Jun's hand with the particular energy of a man who was grateful for continued employment and expressed it through comprehensive medical documentation. Then he left, and the room contracted into something smaller and more honest. Ryu Suk and the other men had retreated to the corridor. It was not an instruction anyone gave. It was the natural consequence of a room reaching a moment that did not accommodate witnesses. Kofi had been persuaded to eat half a container of banana milk that Ryu Suk had acquired from somewhere with the quiet resourcefulness that characterized everything he did, and had subsequently fallen back into a sleep that was entirely different from the sleep of 4 hours ago. Easier, warmer, the sleep of a child who has fought something difficult and won. Amara sat beside him. Kong Jun sat in the chair on the other side of the bed. They had not planned this arrangement. It had simply happened, the way things happen when people stop managing every detail and let the room decide. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had said everything with their presence already and were simply existing in the aftermath of a very long night. Then Amara said, "Thank you. You already said that. I'm saying it again. You do not have to. I know I do not have to," she said, with a sharpness that was more reflex than anger. "I am choosing to. There is a difference." The corner of his mouth moved. "There it is. There what is? You." Underneath the exhaustion. He looked at her across the bed, across their son, across 6 years of deliberate distance. "I was starting to wonder." Amara looked at him for a long moment. "I'm very tired, June." "I know. I'm not talking about tonight." "I know that too." Another silence. Outside, the first suggestion of morning was beginning to negotiate with the darkness. A pale gray uncertainty at the edges of the window that had not yet committed to being dawn, but was clearly considering it. Kofi made a small sound in his sleep. Both of them looked at him simultaneously, with the involuntary synchronicity of two people responding to the same signal from the same source. And then both of them registered what they had just done and looked away at the same time, which was somehow worse. "He said I was very tall," Kong Jun said. "You are very tall. He sounds like you. He sounds like himself." A pause that lasted exactly long enough to mean something. Amara, "Not tonight," she said, quietly. Not a refusal exactly. More like a request for ground that was solid enough to stand on. "He just stabilized 2 hours ago. I cannot have that conversation tonight." Kong Jun looked at her. She looked back at him with the eyes of a woman who had been running for 6 years and was too exhausted to run and too scared to stop. "Okay," he said. "Just that. Okay." Without pressure, without negotiation, without the performance of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted the moment he decided he wanted it. Just okay, delivered with a simplicity that was more disarming than any argument could have been. Amara looked at him like she was trying to figure out when he had learned to do that. He looked back at her like he had been practicing for 6 years. "You should sleep," he said. "I will stay." "You do not have to." "I know I do not have to," he said, and the echo was so precise and so deliberate that she almost smiled despite everything. "I'm choosing to. There is a difference." She looked at him. He looked back. Kofi breathed steadily between them. "You are insufferable," she said. "You called me," he said simply. She had no answer for that, because it was completely, inconveniently, entirely true. She leaned back in her chair. She looked at her son. She listened to the machines that were now beeping with the confident regularity of things that had decided everything was going to be fine, and she let herself, just slightly, just for a moment, believe them. Across the bed, Kong Jun sat in a hospital chair that was genuinely not designed for a man of his height or reputation, and watched the two people in this room with an expression that his organization would not have recognized and could not have categorized. It was the expression of a man who had spent 20 years building an empire and had just understood, in a hospital room at 5 in the morning, that he had been building it around the wrong thing. Kofi woke up. The system failed him, but love did not. A mother who refused to accept defeat, a man who answered on the first ring, and a child too stubborn to give up. If this story is reminding you that the people who show up at 5 in the morning are the ones who actually matter, subscribe now and stay for what comes next. Because the night is stabilizing, but the story is nowhere near finished. Hit like if Kofi deserved to wake up. Subscribe if you believe love that shows up in the dark is the only kind worth keeping. Comment below and tell us, did Kang Jun deserve a second chance? Or did Amara have every right to keep that secret? Only people without hearts will stay silent on that one. Morning arrived in Seoul the way it always did after 3 days of rain. Not gently, not apologetically, but with the aggressive brightness of a city that had processed its grief overnight and decided to move on without discussing it. Light came through the hospital window at an angle that was frankly inconsiderate given the circumstances, landing directly on Amara's face and informing her, without sympathy, that she had slept approximately 90 minutes in a chair that had been designed by someone with strong opinions against human comfort. She woke up the way exhausted mothers wake up, instantly, completely, with every sense already oriented toward the small figure in the bed before she had fully processed that she was conscious. Kofi was awake. Not just awake, sitting up, eating rice porridge from a hospital tray with the focused determination of a child who had decided that being critically ill the previous evening was no reason to approach breakfast with anything less than full commitment. He had also, at some point during Amara's 90 minutes of unconsciousness, apparently had an entire conversation with Ryu Suk, who was standing near the door with the expression of a man who had not anticipated his morning, including extended discussion with a 6-year-old, and was recalibrating his entire understanding of the word unexpected. Ryu Suk says he knows how to fight, Kofi announced, by way of greeting his mother. Good morning to you too, Amara said. He said he would teach me. Amara looked at Ryu Suk with the specific expression of a mother receiving information about her child's new influences that she had not approved in advance. Ryu Suk looked back at her with the carefully neutral expression of a man who had survived 17 years working for Kang Jun by never being visibly responsible for anything. He asked. Ryu Suk said simply, "He is 6. He is very persuasive for 6. This was, Amara had to privately admit, accurate. She turned back to Kofi. He had finished the rice porridge and was now examining Ryu Suk's watch with the intensity of a jeweler and the shamelessness of a child who had not yet learned that staring was considered impolite in most cultures. A lesson Amara had attempted to teach him approximately 40 times, and which had not yet taken root. Where is he? She asked, not specifying, not needing to. Outside, Ryu Suk said. On the phone. He has been on the phone since 6. She nodded. She understood what that meant. Kang Jun's world did not pause for personal emergencies. If anything, his absence from it overnight would have generated the kind of organizational anxiety that required significant management. She imagined the calls, the careful, controlled conversations in which he communicated that everything was fine without explaining anything, because explaining things was not how that world operated. She wondered, briefly and against her better judgment, what he had told them. She found him in the corridor near the window at the end of the hall, exactly where Ryu Suk said he would be. He was on the phone, speaking in a low, precise tone he used when the conversation was important and the other person needed to understand that clearly. He saw her coming, held up one finger without breaking the conversation, finished it in 30 seconds in a way that suggested the person on the other end had understood immediately that 30 seconds was what they were getting. He lowered the phone. In the morning light, without the rain and the darkness and the emergency organizing everything around its urgency, he looked different. Not less, just different. The angles in his face that she had cataloged the night before were still there, still carrying the weight of 20 years of decisions. But there was something else now, too. Something that the night had shifted into visibility. He looked like a man who had stayed. He is eating, she said. I know. Ryu Suk sent a report. Ryu Suk sent you a report about my son eating breakfast. Ryu Suk sends me reports about everything. It is his primary personality trait. Amara almost smiled. Did not quite get there. How long have you been awake? I do not require significant sleep. That is not an answer. It is the answer I have. He looked at her, with a directness that had always been one of his most inconvenient qualities. "How are you?" "I am fine." "You slept 90 minutes in a chair that belongs in an evidence file for crimes against furniture." I said, "I am fine." "You also once told me you were fine while operating on 4 hours of sleep, a bruised rib, and no dinner, so your assessment of your own condition has historically been unreliable." Amara looked at him. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," he said. Simply, without drama. Like a fact about himself, he had long since stopped trying to change. The corridor was quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a trolley moved. A door opened and closed. The ordinary machinery of a hospital morning proceeding without interest in the extraordinary machinery of this particular conversation. "June," she said, "I know. I need to explain. You do not owe me an explanation. I'm not doing it because I owe you." She looked at him steadily. "I am doing it because he deserves to exist in a world where the truth has been said out loud at least once, even if nothing changes afterward." Kang Jun was quiet for a moment. He looked out the window at the morning soul, bright and indifferent and beautiful. Then he looked back at her. "I knew," he said. The words landed quietly. Amara went very still. "Not immediately," he said. "Not even soon. But eventually." He paused. "The timing. The way you left. The way you never once contacted me in 6 years. Not for money, not for safety, not for anything, because you knew that any contact would lead back to this conversation." He looked at her. "A woman like you does not disappear that completely unless she is protecting something more important than herself." Amara felt something shift in her chest. The specific feeling of a secret that has been carried alone for 6 years, meeting the air for the first time. "You never came," she said. And she was not accusing him. She was just saying it, naming the thing. "You did not want me to." "No." And now, she looked at this man in this corridor in this morning and thought about the night behind them and the conversation ahead, and her son sitting in a hospital bed eating rice porridge and asking a former criminal enforcer to teach him how to fight. "Now," she said carefully, "I think we need to have a conversation that is long and honest and probably uncomfortable, and I think we need to have it somewhere that is not a hospital corridor, and I think we need to have it after I've slept more than 90 minutes. Kang Jun looked at her for a long moment. "That is the most reasonable thing you have ever said to me. I have said many reasonable things to you. You told me my penthouse had the interior design personality of a tax office. That was also reasonable." It did. The corner of his mouth moved. "More than last night. Almost in the early morning light of a hospital corridor after the longest night of both their lives, becoming something that resembled an actual smile. I redecorated," he said. Amara looked at him. "Did you? 3 times?" She looked at him for another moment with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously and not letting any of them win. "Kofi would like to learn how to fight," she said finally. "I heard. He is 6. He is also apparently very persuasive for 6, which he did not get from me." Amara said nothing, but something in her face changed just slightly, just enough, in the direction of a future that had not existed 8 hours ago and was now, cautiously, uncertainly, beginning to. Kang Jun knew for 6 years and never came because she asked him not to, and he respected that. A dangerous man who loved someone enough to stay away. A mother who protected her child, even at the cost of her own heart. If that is not the most complicated love story you have ever witnessed, tell us in the comments what is. Subscribe now because Chapter 7 is where everything finally lands, where the debts get settled, where the truth gets spoken, and where this family, broken and unusual and beautiful, figures out if it can survive honesty. Only people who do not believe in second chances will skip it. Everyone else, subscribe, hit like, and we will see you in the final chapter. 3 weeks later, Kofi decided that Kang Jun's penthouse had too many gray things. He announced this on a Tuesday, standing in the middle of the living room in his shoes, which he had been asked to remove at the door and had not, surveying the space with the critical authority of a 6-year-old who had recently survived a near-death experience and appeared to have concluded that this entitled him to opinions about interior design. Kang Jun stood behind him. He looked at the living room. He looked at the gray furniture, the gray walls, the gray curtains that had survived 3 redecorations because he had never been entirely sure what to replace them with. He looked at this small person standing in the middle of it all, rendering judgment with complete confidence. "Your mother said the same thing," he said. Kofi turned around and looked up at him. "When? A long time ago." Kofi considered this. "Did you fix it?" "I tried. 3 times." "You did not try hard enough," Kofi said, with the specific, devastating honesty of a child who has not yet learned that some truths are best delivered with diplomatic packaging. Then he walked to the window and looked out at Seoul spread below them, bright and enormous and indifferent, and said, "You can see everything from here." "Yes. Is that why you live here?" Kong Jun looked at the back of this boy's head, at the set of his small shoulders, at the way he stood at the window with his feet slightly apart, looking at a city like he was already deciding what to do with it. "Yes," he said. "That is why." Kofi nodded, satisfied, as if this confirmed something he had already worked out for himself. Then he turned around and said, with no transition whatsoever, "Are you my father?" The question arrived in the room like a stone dropped into still water, spreading in all directions simultaneously, reaching every wall. Kong Jun had been prepared for many things in his life. He had been prepared for violence, for betrayal, for the specific loneliness of a man who had built a world that kept people close through fear rather than choice. He had not been adequately prepared for a 6-year-old in a gray living room asking the most important question of both their lives with the same energy he might use to ask what was for lunch. He crouched down so that they were level, so that there was nothing above or below, just 2 people in a room telling the truth to each other. "Yes," he said. Kofi looked at him for a long moment with Amara's eyes and his own jawline and 6 years of a life that had been built without this answer. "Okay," Kofi said. "Just that. Okay." In the same simple, complete way his father had said it 3 weeks ago in a hospital corridor, and Kong Jun felt something move through him that he did not have a name for and suspected he would spend a considerable amount of time learning to carry. "Do you have questions?" Kong Jun asked. "Yes," Kofi said. "Can we get a dog?" Amara was in the kitchen when she heard them. Not the words, just the voices. The low one and the small one, existing in the same space without conflict, without the careful managed distance of the past 3 weeks, which had been full of conversations that were long and honest and uncomfortable in exactly the way she had predicted and also necessary in exactly the way she had known. They had talked, really talked, in the way that people talk when they have run out of time and patience for anything less than the truth. She had explained. He had listened. He had said things she did not expect, which was the most Kong Jun thing possible, to wait 6 years and then say exactly the right thing when the moment arrived. He had not asked her to come back to his world. He had asked, carefully, slowly, whether there was any version of the future in which their worlds could exist close enough to each other that Kofi could have both of them without anyone having to choose. It was not a romantic declaration. It was not a promise wrapped in flowers. It was a practical question asked by a man who had learned, apparently somewhere around 5 in the morning in a hospital room, that practicality in service of love was its own kind of poetry. She had not answered immediately. She had taken the days. She had thought about it in the specific, rigorous way she thought about everything from every angle, in every light, holding it up against her 6 years of careful construction and asking honestly whether what she had built was a life or a defense mechanism with very good furniture. The answer, when it came, was uncomfortable in the way that honest answers usually are. It was both. It had started as the second and become the first. And the first deserved to grow in a direction that was not away from something, but toward it. She was not moving into the penthouse. That was not the conversation they were having. She was not dismantling the life she had built, which was real and hers and hard-won. But she was, for the first time in 6 years, facing a direction that included him, that included the possibility of him. That included a Tuesday afternoon in a gray living room where a small boy was interrogating his father about soft furnishings and the family dog situation. She walked to the kitchen doorway and looked into the living room. Kofi was explaining, with considerable enthusiasm and some very creative hand gestures, exactly what kind of dog he wanted and why. Kong Jun was listening with the complete, focused attention he gave to everything, the kind of attention that made the person receiving it feel like the most important thing in the room. And Amara watched this and felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled for 6 years. Not fixed, not resolved, settled. The way things settle when they find the place they were always supposed to be and stop fighting the ground. Kong Jun looked up and saw her in the doorway. She looked back at him across the gray living room that was definitely getting redecorated, across their son who was still explaining the dog situation to an audience of one who was listening like it was a board meeting, across 3 weeks of honesty and 6 years of distance and 1 night of rain that had changed everything. She did not say anything. Neither did he. But something passed between them in the light of that Tuesday afternoon that was not the violent, complicated, underground thing they had been before. It was quieter than that, slower, more considered, the kind of thing that gets built rather than ignited by people who have already burned each other down once and have learned, at considerable cost, to build with better materials. Kofi stopped mid-sentence, looked at his mother, looked at his father, looked at both of them with the bright, comprehensive intelligence of a child who misses nothing. "You are doing the looking thing again," he said. "What looking thing?" Amara said. "The one where you look at each other and do not say anything, but it means something." He tilted his head. Ryu Suk does it too when he thinks nobody is watching. Kong Jun looked at Amara. Amara looked at Kong Jun. They both looked at their son. And then, in a gray living room in a Seoul penthouse on an unremarkable Tuesday, for the first time in 6 years, Amara laughed. Really laughed. The unguarded, genuine kind that she had kept carefully stored away for the entire length of a self-imposed exile. The kind that belonged to the version of her that existed before fear became a reasonable life strategy. Kong Jun watched her laugh, and his expression did something that his organization would not have recognized, and Ryu Suk, had he been present, would have immediately and professionally forgotten he had seen. Kofi looked between them and nodded with satisfaction, as if something he had been quietly engineering had finally arrived at the correct conclusion. So he said, "About the dog." Kofi survived. Amara stopped running. Kong Jun stayed. And somewhere in Seoul, in a penthouse that is about to get a significant amount of color added to it, a family that was broken before it began is learning, slowly and honestly, and with occasional disagreements about interior design, what it means to be whole. This is what happens when people choose truth over safety. When love is stubborn enough to survive 6 years of silence. When a mother refuses to accept what the system tells her is the end. If this story moved you, if you believe that second chances are real, that children deserve both their parents, that love which survives the worst nights is the only kind worth having, subscribe now. Hit like. Share this with someone who needs to believe that things can still come together even after they have fallen completely apart. And if you're the kind of person who thinks Amara should have kept that secret forever, leave a comment below, because that is a conversation worth having. Only people who have never fought for someone they love would scroll past without subscribing. The rest of you already know what to do.